The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone plaza in front of Buckingham Palace. Tourists gathered behind the iron gates, cameras ready, hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Among the crowd stood the Martinez family, visiting London from their small town in Spain. Maria Martinez held her phone up high, trying to get a clear shot over the sea of heads. Her husband, Carlos, stood beside her, pushing their 7-year-old son Diego in his wheelchair. Diego's eyes sparkled with excitement as he watched the tall guards in their distinctive red uniforms and bearskin hats march with perfect precision. The little boy had always been fascinated by soldiers and royal ceremonies. For months, he had begged his parents to bring him to London to see the guards at Buckingham Palace. Despite their limited savings, Maria and Carlos had saved every spare penny to make their son's dream come true. The boy's condition had been with him since birth. A rare neurological disorder had left his legs weak and unable to support his weight. Doctors had told his parents that Diego might never walk independently. The wheelchair had become a part of his identity, something he had accepted with remarkable grace for someone so young. But deep down, Diego held onto a secret wish, one he whispered to the stars every night before sleeping. He wanted to stand tall like the guards he admired so much. As the ceremony began, the crowd pressed forward. Carlos struggled to position Diego's wheelchair where the boy could see properly. The little one craned his neck, but taller adults blocked his view. Frustration began to well up in Diego's eyes, though he tried hard not to show it. This moment meant everything to him. Standing at his post near the palace gate was Guard James Sullivan, a 32-year-old soldier who had served in the Queen's Guard for 8 years. James took his duties seriously, maintaining the strict protocol required of his position. The guards were trained to remain still and expressionless, no matter what happened around them. They were living statues, symbols of British tradition and discipline. But James was also a father. His own daughter, Emma, was 6 years old and the light of his life. During his shifts, when his face remained stern and unmovable, his mind often wandered to her laughter and the way she ran to hug him when he returned home. Fatherhood had changed James in ways he never expected. It had softened something inside him without diminishing his strength. From his position, James could see the entire crowd. His trained eyes scanned for any security concerns, a habit that had become second nature. That's when he noticed the small boy in the wheelchair, struggling to see past the forest of legs and bodies. The child's face showed such longing, such pure desire to witness the ceremony that had drawn him across countries. Something stirred in James's heart. He saw his own daughter in that boy's disappointed expression. He knew the rules, knew the consequences of breaking protocol. Guards had been disciplined before for far less than what he was considering. But in that moment, James made a decision that would change not just his day, but several lives. After the main ceremony concluded and the formations began to disperse, James remained at his post. He waited for the right moment when his commanding officer's attention was directed elsewhere. The crowd started to thin as people moved toward other attractions. The Martinez family stayed longer than most, with Diego still gazing at the palace with wonder, despite having seen little of the actual ceremony. James stepped down from his sentry position. The movement itself was unusual enough to draw glances from nearby tourists. Guards didn't simply walk away from their posts, but James moved with purpose, his tall frame cutting through the remaining crowd. He walked directly toward the family with the wheelchair. Maria noticed the approaching guard first. Her eyes widened with surprise and a touch of concern. Had they done something wrong? Were they standing in a prohibited area? Carlos instinctively placed a protective hand on Diego's shoulder. James stopped in front of the wheelchair and, breaking another rule, allowed his stern expression to soften into a gentle smile. He knelt down so he was at eye level with Diego. The boy stared back at the guard with absolute amazement, unable to believe that one of the soldiers he admired so much was right there in front of him. "Hello there, young man," James said quietly, his voice kind but maintaining a hint of the authority his uniform represented. "I noticed you couldn't see very well during the ceremony." Diego nodded, suddenly shy in the presence of his hero. His small hands gripped the armrests of his wheelchair. "Would you like to come closer to the palace?" James asked. I can show you things that most visitors never get to see. The boy's face transformed. Pure joy replaced the earlier disappointment. He looked up at his parents with pleading eyes, silently begging them to say yes. Maria and Carlos exchanged uncertain glances. They didn't want to get the kind guard in trouble, but they also couldn't bear to deny their son this opportunity. Are you certain? Maria asked in halting English. We don't want problems for you. James stood and gave her a reassuring nod. It's quite all right. Consider it a special tour for a very special visitor. Carlos began to push the wheelchair, but James gently stopped him. If it's all right with you both, I'd like to push his chair. I promise he'll be perfectly safe. The parents agreed, though Maria kept close, her maternal instincts making it impossible for her to let Diego out of her sight. James took hold of the wheelchair handles and began guiding Diego toward a section of the palace grounds that was typically off-limits to regular tourists. As they walked, James told Diego stories about the palace, about the history of the guard, about the different ceremonies and traditions. The boy listened with rapt attention, absorbing every word. He asked questions in broken English, and James patiently answered each one, never making the child feel self-conscious about his language skills. They reached a spot near one of the guard stations where the view was spectacular. From here, Diego could see the palace facade in all its glory, could watch other guards going about their duties, could take in the entire scene that he had traveled so far to witness. This is amazing, Diego whispered, his voice filled with awe. James crouched beside the wheelchair again. He looked at the boy carefully, seeing something in him that went beyond physical limitations. You're very brave, you know, he said. Traveling all this way to see something you love. That takes courage. Diego's eyes met James's, and in that moment, a connection formed between them. It was the kind of understanding that transcends language and circumstance. James saw determination in the boy's gaze, a strength that had nothing to do with legs or walking. Do you want to be a soldier? James asked. Diego nodded enthusiastically. Yes, but he trailed off, looking down at his legs. The unspoken reality hung in the air between them. James placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. Strength comes in many forms, he said. Some of the bravest people I've known couldn't walk, but they stood tall in other ways. The boy seemed to ponder this, his young mind working to understand the deeper meaning behind the guard's words. Maria watched the interaction with tears beginning to form in her eyes. This stranger was giving her son something precious, something that couldn't be bought or planned. He was giving Diego respect, treating him not as a child to be pitied, but as an equal worthy of a soldier's time and attention. James stood and looked around. An idea was forming in his mind, something bold and probably foolish according to military protocol. But sometimes, he thought, protocols needed to bend for humanity to shine through. Diego, James said, his voice taking on a more formal tone, would you like to try on my bearskin hat? The question stunned everyone within earshot. The bearskin hat was sacred to the guards, part of their identity and tradition. They weren't casual props for tourist photos. But James was already removing his hat, holding the iconic piece carefully. Really? Diego could barely breathe the word. Really, James confirmed, and carefully placed the large hat on the boy's head. It was comically oversized, sliding down past Diego's eyebrows, but the child's grin stretched from ear to ear. He sat up as straight as he could in his wheelchair, trying to look like a proper guard despite the hat covering half his face. Carlos quickly raised his phone to capture the moment. Other tourists who had lingered nearby began taking photos too, touched by the scene unfolding before them. Maria covered her mouth with her hand, overwhelmed by the kindness this stranger was showing their son. But James wasn't finished. Another idea had taken root, one that carried more risk but felt absolutely necessary. He knelt in front of Diego again and gently removed the bearskin hat. The boy's face fell slightly, thinking the special moment was over. Diego, James said seriously, I want to ask you something important. How would you like to stand at attention like a real guard? The question didn't immediately register. Stand? The word seemed impossible, a door that had been closed since Diego's birth. The boy looked confused, Then understanding began to dawn on his face, followed quickly by fear. I can't, Diego said softly, his earlier confidence evaporating. My legs don't work right. I know, James said gently, but you won't be standing alone. I'll be there. We'll stand together. Maria stepped forward quickly. Senor, please, he could fall. He could get hurt. James looked up at her, and she saw complete sincerity in his eyes. I won't let him fall. I promise you. I'm a father too. I would never put a child in danger. Something in his voice, in his expression, convinced Maria. She looked at her husband, and Carlos gave a small nod. They both looked down at their son, leaving the decision to him. Diego was trembling slightly, caught between desire and fear. He had dreamed of standing, of being tall, of being like the guards he admired. But the reality of it terrified him. His legs were weak, unpredictable. What if he collapsed? What if he embarrassed himself in front of all these people? But then he looked into Guard James's eyes and saw absolute confidence. The soldier believed Diego could do this. Maybe, just maybe, he could. Okay, Diego whispered. I'll try. James smiled warmly. That's all anyone can ever do. Try their best. The guard positioned himself beside the wheelchair and carefully, very carefully, began to help Diego stand. He placed the boy's hands on the wheelchair armrests for initial support, then wrapped one strong arm around Diego's waist. With his other hand, he supported Diego under his arm. Nice and slow, James coached. Let me take your weight. Don't worry about your legs yet. Just let yourself rise. Diego pushed with his arms, and with James's considerable strength supporting him, the boy rose from the seated position he had known for most of his conscious life. His legs dangled at first, uncertain of their purpose. The muscles had developed somewhat through years of physical therapy, but they had never been asked to truly support his weight. James held him securely, taking on almost all of Diego's weight. The boy was suspended more than standing, but his feet touched the ground. For the first time in his memory, Diego was vertical. His perspective changed completely. Look up, James said softly. See the world from this height. Diego raised his eyes and gasped. Everything looked different from here. He could see over the low wall, could see across the plaza, could see the palace and the gardens and the people at his own eye level rather than from below. Tears began streaming down his face without him even realizing it. Maria was openly weeping now, watching her baby boy standing, even if he was being held. Carlos had his phone forgotten in his hand, too moved to remember to record the moment. Around them, tourists had stopped and formed a quiet circle, sensing they were witnessing something profound. How does it feel? James asked. Tall, Diego managed to say through his tears. I feel tall. You are tall, James assured him. You're standing like a guard. Are you ready for the next part? Diego nodded, though fear flickered across his face again. James adjusted his grip, now holding Diego from behind, his arms securely under the boy's arms and across his chest. I'm going to help you put weight on your legs, just a little bit at first. Remember, I've got you. You cannot fall. Slowly, carefully, James began to lower Diego slightly, encouraging the boy's feet to make fuller contact with the ground. Diego's legs trembled violently with the unfamiliar sensation and demand. His knees wanted to buckle immediately. Fight it, James said, his voice taking on the tone of a commanding officer. Tell your legs what to do. You're in charge, Diego, not your condition. You. The boy gritted his teeth, focusing with every ounce of concentration he possessed. His legs shook like leaves in a storm, but they held. Not independently, not without James's considerable support, but they bore some of his weight. They functioned, even if imperfectly. That's it, James encouraged. You're doing it. You're standing, Diego. You're really standing. For 10 seconds, then 20, then 30, the boy stood with support. Each second was a victory, each moment a miracle to his parents who had been told this might never happen. Diego's face showed fierce determination mixed with joy and disbelief. Maria couldn't help herself. She rushed forward, going to her knees in front of her son so she could look up at him for the first time in his life. Mi amor, she sobbed. Look at you. Look at my brave boy." Diego looked down at his mother, and the shift in perspective wasn't lost on him. He was looking down at her. He was standing while she knelt. The reversal of their usual positions struck him deeply. "Mama," he said through his own tears, "I'm standing. I'm really standing." Carlos joined his wife, both parents now at their son's feet, looking up at him with such love and pride that James felt his own eyes growing wet despite his military training. "You're not just standing," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're standing tall. You're standing proud. You're standing like a guard." The moment stretched on, time seeming to slow down around the small group. The other tourists kept their respectful distance, many of them wiping their own eyes as they witnessed this family's joy. Finally, James could feel Diego's legs beginning to give out more seriously. The boy had pushed himself far beyond what his body was conditioned to do. "Okay, soldier," James said gently. "Mission accomplished. Time to rest." With the same careful attention, James helped Diego back down into his wheelchair. The boy collapsed into the seat, exhausted but exhilarated. His legs ached in ways they never had before, but it was a good ache, the feeling of muscles that had been used and challenged. Maria and Carlos both hugged their son tightly, then turned to James. Maria reached up and hugged the tall guard, not caring about protocol or propriety. "Thank you," she kept saying. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Carlos shook James's hand firmly, his grip conveying everything his limited English couldn't express. "You give us gift," he managed to say. "Big gift. We never forget." James felt humbled by their gratitude. "He did the hard part," he said, nodding toward Diego. "I just made sure he didn't fall. His courage, his strength, that was all him." Diego looked up at his hero with absolute adoration. In the course of 30 minutes, this guard had given him something more valuable than gold. He had given him a memory of standing, a feeling of capability, and most importantly, hope. Hope that maybe, with enough work and determination, he might stand again. Maybe one day, he might even walk. "When I grow up," Diego said with absolute certainty, "I want to be just like you." James smiled and gave the boy a proper military salute. "Then I'll expect to see you back here in uniform one day, Guard Diego Martinez." The boy returned the salute as best he could, his small hand rising to his forehead with serious intent. As the family prepared to leave, James reached into his jacket and pulled out something small. It was his guard pin, a small emblem that he wore on his uniform. It wasn't regulation to give it away, and he'd probably catch some grief for losing it, but James didn't care. He pressed the pin into Diego's palm. "Keep this," he said. "Whenever you feel like you can't do something, look at this and remember. Remember that you stood tall at Buckingham Palace. Remember that a guard saw a soldier in you." Diego clutched the pin like it was the most precious treasure in the world, because to him, it was. As the Martinez family finally left, Carlos pushing Diego's wheelchair back toward the main street, the boy kept turning around to look at James. The guard had returned to his post, once again assuming the stern, motionless expression required of his position. But just before they turned the corner and lost sight of him, James broke protocol one last time and gave Diego a subtle wink. The boy waved enthusiastically, clutching the guard pin in his other hand. His parents were already talking about the moment, about the incredible kindness they had witnessed. They knew this story would be told and retold in their family for generations. The day Diego stood at Buckingham Palace, the day a royal guard gave their son his legs, even if just for a few precious moments. What none of them knew yet was that this was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning of something much bigger, something that would ripple outward in ways none of them could predict. The encounter had been witnessed by dozens of tourists with cameras and social media accounts. By nightfall, photos and videos of the moment would begin spreading across the internet. And somewhere in a television studio in London, a producer would see one of those videos and recognize something special. Something that deserved a wider audience. Something that needed to be shared with the world. The video appeared first on Twitter at 6:47 p.m. London time. A tourist from Australia had captured the entire encounter between James and Diego, from the moment the guard approached the wheelchair to the triumphant seconds when the boy stood supported in his arms. The caption was simple. Royal Guard breaks protocol to help disabled boy stand for the first time. Faith in humanity restored. Within an hour, the video had been shared 3,000 times. By midnight, that number had climbed to 50,000. People from around the world commented with heart emojis, crying faces, and messages of appreciation for the guard's kindness. The video was picked up by news aggregators, then by local news stations, and by morning, it had gone truly viral. James Sullivan knew nothing about this. He had finished his shift, returned to his barracks, and gone home to his small flat in South London. His daughter Emma had run to greet him at the door as always, and he had scooped her up in his arms, grateful for the normalcy of his evening routine. He had made her dinner, helped her with a bit of homework, and tucked her into bed with her favorite story. Only then did he check his phone. The messages and notifications were overwhelming. His phone buzzed continuously with texts from friends, family members, and people he barely knew. His social media accounts, which he rarely used, showed hundreds of new followers and thousands of notifications. Confused and slightly alarmed, James scrolled through until he found the video that had started it all. Watching himself on screen felt strange. He saw himself approach the family, saw his own face soften as he knelt beside Diego's wheelchair, witnessed the moment he helped the boy stand. Seeing it from an outside perspective, James understood why people were moved. But he also felt uncomfortable with the attention. He had simply done what felt right in the moment. He hadn't thought about cameras or consequences or viral videos. His phone rang. It was his commanding officer, Major Robert Dennings. James's stomach tightened as he answered. This was it. He was going to face discipline for breaking protocol, for leaving his post, for treating his position as something less than the sacred duty it was meant to be. Sullivan, the major's voice was unreadable. I assume you've seen the video? Yes, sir. I have. I want to apologize for breaking protocol. I know what I did was against regulations, and I take full responsibility. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, unexpectedly, Major Dennings laughed. It wasn't a harsh laugh, but one of genuine amusement and something else. Pride, perhaps. Relax, James. You're not in trouble. Quite the opposite, actually. The palace has been fielding calls all evening from news organizations wanting to know about the guard in the video. The public response has been overwhelmingly positive. You've made the guard look good, shown the human side of the institution. The brass is pleased, believe it or not. James let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. I honestly didn't think about any of that, sir. I just saw a kid who needed help. I know. That's what makes it genuine. That's why people are responding to it. The major's tone became more official. You should know that you're probably going to receive some media requests. The palace PR team will be in touch with guidelines for what you can and cannot say if you choose to do interviews. But James, between you and me, you did good. Really good. After hanging up, James sat on his sofa in the dark, trying to process what was happening. He thought about Diego and his family, wondering if they had seen the video, wondering how they were handling the unexpected attention. He hoped it wouldn't be too overwhelming for them, especially for the boy. Meanwhile, in their small hotel room near Victoria Station, the Martinez family was experiencing their own whirlwind. Maria had received messages from relatives in Spain who had seen the video on Facebook. Friends were tagging her in posts. By the time she understood what was happening, the video had been viewed millions of times. Carlos had initially worried about their privacy, about Diego's image being shared so widely without their permission. But then he watched the video with his wife and son, and he saw what the rest of the world was seeing. He saw a beautiful moment of human kindness. He saw his son's face filled with joy and determination. He saw hope. Diego watched the video over and over, each viewing bringing fresh tears to his eyes. He could see himself standing, could remember exactly how it felt. The guard pin James had given him sat on the nightstand beside the hotel bed, catching the lamplight. Diego had barely let it out of his sight since receiving it. Mama, Diego said, watching the video for perhaps the 20th time. Do you think we could find Guard James to say thank you again? Maria smiled at her son. I think the whole world wants to find him, mi amor. She was right. By the next morning, news organizations were actively trying to identify and locate both the guard and the family. The palace confirmed that the guard was James Sullivan, a decorated member of the Queen's Guard, but provided no further information due to security and privacy protocols. The Martinez family was harder to track down, as they were tourists with no permanent London address. It was a reporter named Sarah Chen from the BBC who finally found them. She had seen Maria's tagged Facebook posts and had sent her a message asking if they would be willing to share their story. Maria, after discussing it with Carlos, agreed to a brief interview. They felt it was important that people know how much James's actions had meant to them, that they understood the gift he had given their son. The interview was conducted in their hotel room the following afternoon. Sarah was gentle with Diego, asking him simple questions about what he remembered from the experience. The boy, initially shy in front of the camera, gradually opened up when talking about guard James. He was so strong, Diego said in Spanish, with Maria translating, but also kind. He didn't look at me like I was broken. He looked at me like I was a soldier, like him. How did it feel when you stood up? Sarah asked. Diego's eyes grew distant, remembering. Like flying, he said softly. Like being tall as a tree. Like I could do anything. He pulled the guard pin from his pocket, showing it to the camera. He gave me this. He said to look at it when I think I can't do something. The interview aired that evening on the BBC Evening News. It was picked up by other networks, translated into multiple languages, and shared across continents. The story was no longer just about a kind guard and a sweet moment. It had become something larger, a symbol of compassion, of seeing past disabilities to the person underneath, of going beyond duty to genuine humanity. Public sentiment swelled. A petition appeared online asking the palace to recognize James Sullivan's actions officially. It gathered 50,000 signatures in 2 days. Letters and emails poured into Buckingham Palace expressing gratitude and admiration for the guard's kindness. Some people sent donations to charities supporting children with disabilities, inspired by Diego's story. James found himself suddenly recognizable in public. People approached him on the street, thanking him, asking for photos. It was strange and uncomfortable for someone who valued privacy and had chosen a career where he was meant to be a silent, stoic presence. But he handled it with the same grace he had shown Diego, accepting thanks with humility and always deflecting credit back to the boy's own courage. 3 days after the initial encounter, James received an unexpected phone call. It was from Maria Martinez, who had gotten his number through the palace PR team. Her English was halting but sincere. "Mr. James," she said, "we go back to Spain tomorrow, but Diego, he wants to see you again. He wants to say thank you properly. Is it possible?" James didn't hesitate. "Of course. Tell me when and where." They arranged to meet at a small park near the hotel the following morning, before the family's afternoon flight. James arrived early, wearing civilian clothes for the first time since Diego had met him. He felt oddly nervous, like this meeting carried more weight than their first encounter. When the Martinez family arrived, Diego's face lit up with recognition despite James being out of uniform. The boy was clutching the guard pin in his hand as always. He had prepared a speech in English, having practiced with his mother, but when the moment came, all the words fled from his mind. James knelt down beside the wheelchair, just as he had before. "Hello again, soldier," he said with a warm smile. "Thank you," Diego managed to say. "Thank you for helping me stand." "You're welcome," James replied. "But you know what? I've been thinking about that day and I realized something. I didn't help you stand. You stood. I just made sure you were safe while you did it. That strength was yours, Diego. It's always been yours." Maria translated the words for Diego, wanting to make sure he understood the full meaning. The boy listened intently, then nodded slowly as the concept sank in. "I've been doing my exercises every day," Diego said through his mother's translation. "My physical therapist says my legs are getting stronger. She says maybe one day I really could walk. Not for long, maybe just a little, but..." "That's wonderful," James said, genuine pride in his voice. "Keep working hard. Keep being brave. You've already done something incredible." Carlos stepped forward and handed James a small package wrapped in colorful paper. For you, he said, from our family. James opened it carefully. Inside was a framed photograph that the family must have had printed. It showed the moment Diego stood with James's support, both of them looking at the camera with expressions of joy and determination. Along the bottom, someone had written in careful English, "The day Diego stood tall. Thank you, Guard James from the Martinez family." "This is beautiful," James said, his voice catching slightly. "I'll treasure it, I promise." Diego reached into his pocket and pulled out the guard pin, holding it out to James. "You should have this back," he said. But James gently closed Diego's fingers around the pin. "No, that's yours to keep. A soldier doesn't give up his badge. You earned that." The boy's eyes welled with tears, but they were happy tears. He understood the significance of the gesture, understood that James was still seeing him as an equal, as someone worthy of carrying a piece of the Guard tradition. They spent another hour together in the park. James pushed Diego on the wheelchair-accessible swings while Emma, whom James had brought along, played with Diego like they were old friends. The two children laughed together, the language barrier meaningless in the universal language of play. Maria and Carlos sat on a bench with James, trying to express their gratitude in their limited English, while he tried to tell them how much their son had affected him in his limited Spanish. It was messy and imperfect and absolutely beautiful. When it was finally time for the family to leave for the airport, the goodbyes were tearful. Diego hugged James tightly, not wanting to let go. "I'll come back someday," the boy promised. "I'll come back and visit you." "I'll be here," James assured him. "And maybe next time, you'll stand even taller. Maybe you'll take a few steps. Who knows what you'll be capable of by then?" As the family's taxi pulled away, Diego pressed his face to the window, waving until James was just a distant figure in the park. He clutched the guard pin tightly, feeling its edges press into his palm. It was a reminder, a promise, a piece of hope made tangible. The flight back to Spain was long, but Diego spent much of it awake, staring at the clouds and thinking. Something had shifted inside him during those moments he stood at Buckingham Palace. A door had opened in his mind, showing him possibilities he had never dared to imagine before. The doctors had said he might never walk. But doctors could be wrong. James had shown him that impossible things could happen when courage and support came together. When they arrived home in their small Spanish town, the Martinez family discovered that their local community had seen the viral video. Neighbors greeted them with flowers and congratulations. Diego's school had prepared a special assembly in his honor, welcoming him back as a local hero. The attention was overwhelming, but also warming. Diego's physical therapist, Señora Rosa, a woman who had worked with him since he was 3 years old, requested an immediate session. She had seen the video too, had watched her patient do something she had never witnessed in 4 years of therapy. When Diego arrived at her clinic, she greeted him with tears in her eyes. "Show me," she said simply. With his parents' help and Señora Rosa's professional support, Diego demonstrated what he could do. His legs were stronger than they had been, whether from the exertion at Buckingham Palace or from his renewed determination to exercise. He still couldn't stand independently, still couldn't support his full weight without help. But there was progress, undeniable and measurable progress. Señora Rosa developed a new therapy plan, more aggressive than before, designed to build on Diego's newfound strength and motivation. The sessions would be challenging, often painful, pushing Diego's limits in ways that would make him want to quit. But now he had something he hadn't possessed before. He had proof that his legs could do more than he thought. He had stood at Buckingham Palace. He had felt himself vertical and tall. That memory would carry him through the difficult days ahead. Back in London, James Sullivan's life was also changing in unexpected ways. The recognition he received led to an invitation to speak at a charity event supporting children with physical disabilities. Despite his discomfort with public speaking, James accepted. During his speech, he spoke about Diego, about courage, about how we all have the power to make a moment special for someone else. "I'm a soldier," James told the audience. "I'm trained to stand still, to follow orders, to maintain protocol. But sometimes the right thing to do is to break the rules. Sometimes what matters most isn't following tradition, but creating a moment that could change a life. When I saw Diego that day, I didn't think about regulations or consequences. I just saw a child who needed someone to believe in him. We all have opportunities like that every day. The question is whether we'll take them. The speech was shared online, adding another layer to the story that had captured so many hearts. James received job offers from private security firms offering significantly more money than his guard position paid. But he turned them all down. He loved his work, loved the tradition and discipline of the guard. He just understood now that tradition could coexist with compassion. That strength included knowing when to be gentle. Several months passed. Diego continued his intensive physical therapy, working harder than he ever had before. There were setbacks and frustrations. Some days his legs simply wouldn't cooperate, no matter how hard he tried. On those days, he would take out the guard pin and hold it, remembering James's words. That strength was yours. It's always been yours. One evening, 6 months after the encounter at Buckingham Palace, Maria received an email that made her gasp aloud. It was from a British television production company. They wanted to do a follow-up piece on Diego's story, documenting his progress. They would fly the family back to London, cover all expenses, and arrange another meeting with James Sullivan. More importantly, they wanted to film Diego's therapy sessions to show the real work behind those magical moments of standing. After a family discussion, the Martinez family agreed. The documentary would give hope to other families facing similar challenges, would show that progress wasn't instant or easy, but it was possible. It would show the truth behind the viral moment, the hard work and determination required to turn one beautiful second into lasting change. The production crew arrived at their home in Spain first, filming Diego's daily routine, his therapy sessions with Señora Rosa, his exercises at home. They captured his frustrations when his legs wouldn't cooperate and his triumphs when he managed to do something new. They interviewed his physical therapist, who spoke about the remarkable improvement in Diego's strength and determination since the Buckingham Palace incident. Before that day, Señora Rosa said to the camera, Diego did his exercises because he was told to. He was a good patient, but his heart wasn't fully in it. He had accepted limitations as absolute. But after London, something changed. Now he does his exercises because he wants to. He pushes himself beyond what I ask of him. He believes he can improve, and that belief makes all the difference. The documentary also captured a moment that Diego's parents would treasure forever. During one therapy session, with the cameras rolling, Diego managed to stand from his wheelchair with minimal support from Señora Rosa. It was brief, perhaps 5 seconds, but his legs bore most of his weight. It was progress, real and measurable progress. Diego's face showed fierce concentration followed by elation when he lowered back into his chair. "Did you see that?" he asked the camera, breathless and excited. Guard James was right. The strength was mine. It was here all along. 2 weeks later, the Martinez family flew back to London. The production company had arranged something special, a surprise they hadn't told Diego about. They were going to film the reunion with James, but they had also gotten special permission for something extraordinary. Diego would be allowed to visit Buckingham Palace during a private moment, before public hours, and he would have the chance to try standing again at the very spot where he had stood 6 months earlier. The morning of the reunion, Diego was almost vibrating with excitement. He wore his best clothes and had pinned James's guard pin to his shirt. He had practiced what he wanted to say in English, determined to express himself in the guard's language this time. They arrived at Buckingham Palace just after dawn. The plaza was empty except for the film crew, a few palace officials, and James Sullivan standing near the gate in his full uniform. When Diego saw him, the boy shouted his name with pure joy. James approached with that same warm smile Diego remembered. 6 months felt like 6 years in the life of a child, and James could see how much Diego had grown, not just physically, but in confidence and bearing. "Look at you," James said, kneeling beside the wheelchair. "You've grown." "I've been working hard," Diego said in careful English. "My therapist says I'm much stronger." "I can see that in your face," James replied. "You carry yourself differently, like you know a secret that others don't." Diego nodded eagerly. "I know that I can do more than I thought." You taught me that. The film crew captured every moment as they moved to the spot where Diego had stood before. The sun was rising behind the palace, casting golden light across the plaza. It was a perfect cinematic moment, but more importantly, it was real. This was genuinely happening, not staged or manufactured, but authentic. "Are you ready?" James asked Diego. "Ready to stand again?" Diego took a deep breath and nodded. "But this time," he said, his English faltering slightly as he tried to express something important, "I want to try more. I want to try to move my legs." James's eyebrows rose slightly. This was beyond what they had done before. "Are you sure? We don't want to push too hard." "I'm sure," Diego said with determination. "I've been practicing. My therapist says maybe I can do a little walking motion, even if it's not real walking yet." Maria stepped forward, concern and pride warring on her face. His therapist did say he could try. "With full support," she confirmed to James. James looked at the boy seriously. "Okay, soldier, we'll try. But you have to promise to tell me if anything hurts or feels wrong. Deal?" "Deal," Diego agreed. With the same careful attention as before, James helped Diego rise from the wheelchair. The boy's legs shook, but not as violently as they had months ago. There was strength there now, strength built through months of dedicated work. Diego's feet planted firmly on the ground, and with James supporting most of his weight, he stood tall once again. The feeling was just as overwhelming as Diego remembered, but also familiar now. He had done this before. He could do it again. He belonged in this position, vertical and tall. "How do you feel?" James asked. "Strong," Diego answered, and he meant it. As Diego guided the family through the palace, telling Sofia about his experience, James happened to be passing by in his guard uniform. He was 44 now, with some gray at his temples, but still tall and strong and proud in his red coat. He saw Diego with the Italian family and understood immediately what was happening. The cycle was continuing, kindness passed forward like a torch from one person to another. Their eyes met across the plaza. No words were needed. James gave Diego a subtle nod of approval, and Diego smiled back with understanding. They were both part of something bigger than themselves now, a tradition of compassion that would outlast them both. Diego continued Sofia's tour, eventually bringing her to a quiet corner where James joined them, having arranged to take a brief break from his post. Together, they gave Sofia an experience similar to what Diego had received years before. With her parents' permission and James's support, they helped Sofia stand from her wheelchair, holding her securely while she felt the sensation of being upright and tall. Sofia's face showed the same wonder Diego's had shown all those years ago. She looked around from her new height, seeing the world differently, feeling possibility open up inside her. Her parents cried, just as Carlos and Maria had cried. James and Diego exchanged knowing glances, both of them understanding the significance of this moment, the continuation of a story that had started with one impulsive act of kindness. After Sofia and her family left, promising to stay in touch and continue her physical therapy with renewed determination, Diego and James sat together on a bench in the palace gardens. It was a rare, quiet moment in their busy schedules. "Does it ever feel strange?" Diego asked, "knowing that one decision you made changed so many lives?" James thought about the question carefully. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but mostly it just feels right. I think about all the moments in life where we have a choice. We can follow the rules, stay in our lane, keep things simple. Or we can take a risk for something that matters. I almost didn't approach your wheelchair that day. I almost stayed at my post like I was supposed to. But something told me to take the chance." "I'm glad you did," Diego said softly. "Not just for me, but for Sofia, and for all the other kids who've been helped because of what you started." "How many children have come through the Sullivan Initiative now?" "Over 5,000 in the past 12 years, James replied. 5,000 children who got to feel special, who got to see that people care, who got to experience a moment of magic. And it all started because you needed to see the changing of the guard." Diego laughed. "I was so disappointed when I couldn't see over the crowd. I thought the whole trip was ruined." "Best disappointment ever then," James said with a smile. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching palace staff and tourists move about their business. Diego's phone buzzed with a message from Senora Rosa, his physical therapist from Spain, who he still kept in close contact with. She had sent him a video of her newest patient, a 5-year-old boy taking his first assisted steps. The message read, "Told him about you, gave him hope. Thank you for being living proof." Diego showed the message to James, who read it with a thoughtful expression. "That's the real legacy," James said. "Not the viral videos or the documentaries or the awards. It's the hope. It's showing people that their challenges don't define their worth or their possibilities." "I learned that from you," Diego pointed out. "No," James corrected gently, echoing words he had spoken years ago. "You taught me that. I just recognized something in you that was already there. My role was just to give you a safe space to discover your own strength." As the sun began to set over London, casting golden light across the palace grounds, Diego reflected on his journey. From a 7-year-old boy who couldn't stand, to a teenager learning to walk with braces, to a young man working at the very place that had changed his life. The path hadn't been straight or easy. There had been pain and frustration, setbacks and disappointments. But there had also been progress and joy, and the satisfaction of earning every inch of ground he gained. His wheelchair sat nearby, always accessible for when he needed it. His crutches leaned against the bench. These tools were part of his life, and he no longer saw them as symbols of limitation, but as instruments that gave him freedom. They helped him navigate a world not built for him, allowed him to work and travel and live fully. "I got a letter last week," Diego said, "from a university in Madrid. They want me to speak at their disability studies program about my experience, about how media portrayal affects perception and treatment of people with disabilities." "That's wonderful," James said. "Will you do it?" "I think so. There's so much more to my story than the viral video, you know?" The video showed one beautiful moment, but it didn't show the years of therapy, the pain, the times I wanted to quit. It didn't show my parents' sacrifices or the doctors who said I'd never walk, or the therapist who pushed me beyond what I thought I could do. All of that matters too. James nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. The world loves the dramatic moment, the instant transformation. But real life is about the slow work, the daily effort, the long road of incremental progress." "Exactly," Diego agreed. "And that's what I want to share with people. Not just the magic of standing at Buckingham Palace, but the reality of everything that came after, the good and the hard parts together." As they prepared to end their break and return to their duties, Diego stood carefully, positioning his crutches and finding his balance. James watched, ready to help if needed, but knowing Diego could manage on his own. The young man moved with practiced efficiency, his body having learned over years how to work with its limitations. "Same time next week?" Diego asked. "Sophia's family's coming back, and her father wanted to meet you properly." "I'll be here," James promised. They parted ways, each returning to their roles. James went back to his guard post, standing tall and still, a symbol of tradition and discipline. But now he also represented something else: compassion within duty, humanity within protocol. Diego went back to visitor services, greeting the next family with warmth and understanding, ready to make their palace experience special. The years continued to pass. Diego became increasingly skilled at his job, eventually being promoted to coordinator of the Sullivan Initiative programs. He developed new workshops and activities, expanded partnerships with disability organizations, and trained other staff members on how to interact respectfully and effectively with visitors who had various challenges. His work made a real difference in how the palace served all its visitors. James eventually retired from active guard duty at age 50 after 28 years of service. He transitioned to a training role, teaching new guards not just about protocol and procedure, but about the values that should guide their service. He often told Diego's story to recruits, using it as an example of how following your heart and following your duty didn't have to be contradictions. At James's retirement ceremony, Diego was there in the audience. When James gave his farewell speech, he spoke about his career, about the honor of serving, about the traditions he had been part of. But he also spoke about the day that had defined his service more than any other. I've stood guard through rain and snow, through protests and celebrations, through routine days and historic moments, James said. But the proudest moment of my career wasn't standing still. It was when I chose to move, to approach a child who needed help, to break protocol for something more important than protocol. That decision taught me that true strength includes gentleness, that real discipline means knowing when rules matter and when humanity matters more. And it brought me a friend who has enriched my life in ways I could never have imagined. He looked directly at Diego in the audience. Thank you for letting me be part of your journey. Thank you for showing me what courage really looks like. Diego wiped tears from his face, overwhelmed by the acknowledgement. After the ceremony, they embraced warmly, two men whose lives had been permanently interwoven by one morning's decision 12 years earlier. Diego continued working at the palace for several more years, but he also pursued other passions. He wrote a book about his experiences, titled Standing Tall, A Journey of Determination and Kindness. The book became a bestseller in Spain and was translated into multiple languages. He used the proceeds to start a foundation that provided funding for physical therapy for children whose families couldn't afford it. The foundation was named the First Step Foundation, recognizing that every journey begins with someone taking that first difficult step toward change. He became a sought-after speaker, traveling internationally to share his story at conferences, schools, and community events. He spoke about disability rights, about the power of kindness, about resilience and determination. But he always made sure to credit not just James, but all the people who had helped him along the way. His parents, who had sacrificed so much, Senora Rosa, who had pushed him in therapy, the doctors who had refused to give up on him, the teachers who had accommodated his needs, the friends who had treated him as an equal. Nobody succeeds alone, Diego would often say in his speeches. Every achievement is built on a foundation of people who believed in us, helped us, gave us chances. My story isn't about one boy overcoming disability. It's about a community of people who came together to help a child reach his potential. Guard James was the most visible part of that community, but he was one of many. When Diego was 30 years old, he met someone special. Her name was Elena, and she was a physical therapist working at a London hospital. She had actually seen the original viral video years before and had been inspired to pursue her career because of it. They met at a charity event for the First Step Foundation and immediately connected over their shared passion for helping others. Elena understood Diego's limitations and capabilities without pity or excessive concern. She loved him for who he was, challenges and all. They married 2 years later in a ceremony held, with special permission, in the gardens of Buckingham Palace. James was Diego's best man, standing beside him as he had stood beside him so many times before. During his wedding speech, Diego spoke about the journey that had brought him to this moment. When I was 7 years old, he said, I thought standing for a few seconds with help was the greatest achievement I could hope for. I thought that moment at Buckingham Palace was the peak of what I could accomplish. But that moment wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. It showed me that with support and determination, I could do more than I dreamed. Now here I am, standing on my own feet, married to the love of my life, working a job I'm passionate about, making a difference in other people's lives. The little boy in that viral video wouldn't believe this was possible. But it is possible, because impossible is just a challenge waiting for the right combination of effort and support. As Diego and Elena danced their first dance as a married couple, Diego using a cane for balance but moving gracefully nonetheless, many people in the audience were crying. Maria and Carlos stood with their arms around each other, hardly able to believe that their little boy, the one doctors said might never walk, was dancing at his own wedding. James watched with his own family, his daughter Emma now a young woman pursuing a career in social work, inspired by her father's example and Diego's story. James's wife Sarah squeezed his hand, understanding without words what he was feeling. Pride, joy, and the profound satisfaction of knowing that one choice, one act of kindness, had rippled outward into all of this. The last dance of the evening was different from tradition. Instead of the usual parent dances, Diego asked James to join him on the dance floor. To the surprise of many guests but the understanding of those who knew their story, the two men stood together one more time, echoing that moment so many years ago, but transformed by time and growth and love. "Thank you," Diego said simply, "for everything." "Thank you," James replied, "for reminding me why kindness matters, for showing me that taking a chance on someone is always worth it." They embraced as brothers, as friends, as two souls whose paths had crossed at exactly the right moment and had been better for it ever since. Diego's life continued to unfold in ways that seven-year-old boy could never have imagined. He and Elena had two children, both healthy and able-bodied, who grew up hearing the story of their father's courage and determination. Diego made sure his children understood the value of compassion, of helping others, of seeing past surface differences to the person underneath. He taught them that everyone faces challenges, visible or invisible, and that kindness costs nothing but means everything. The First Step Foundation grew substantially over the years, helping thousands of children access the therapy and medical care they needed. Diego remained actively involved, reviewing applications, meeting families, and ensuring the foundation stayed true to its mission. Every child helped by the foundation received a small pin, similar to the guard pin James had given Diego, as a reminder that someone believed in them and their potential. James lived to see his own grandchildren, Emma having started a family of her own. He told them all the story of Diego and the day at Buckingham Palace, making sure they understood that being strong meant being kind. That breaking rules was sometimes right when done for the right reasons. That one moment of compassion could echo through decades. The Sullivan Initiative at Buckingham Palace became a permanent and beloved institution. It had helped tens of thousands of children over the years and had inspired similar programs at historic sites around the world. The legacy of that one morning's decision to help a child in a wheelchair had grown far beyond anything James or Diego could have predicted. On the 20th anniversary of the original viral video, the BBC did one final documentary bringing the story full circle. It showed Diego now, a successful author and advocate, husband and father, still working with the foundation and occasionally consulting with the palace. It showed James in retirement, proud of his service and proud of his friend. It showed Sophia from Italy, now a university student studying to be a teacher, specializing in inclusive education. It showed dozens of other children whose lives had been touched by the Sullivan Initiative or the First Step Foundation, each of them carrying forward the legacy of kindness and determination. The documentary ended with James and Diego returning to the exact spot at Buckingham Palace where it had all begun. They stood together, two men whose lives had been irrevocably changed by choosing compassion over protocol, connection over caution. Diego stood on his own feet, cane in hand but standing independently, in a way that seven-year-old Diego could never have imagined. "If you could go back and tell that little boy in the wheelchair what his life would become," the interviewer asked Diego, "what would you say?" Diego thought for a long moment, looking at the plaza where tourists now gathered, at the palace that had become such a central part of his story, at James standing beside him as he always had been. "I would tell him that the hard parts don't go away," Diego said thoughtfully, "that he'll still have challenges, still need help, still face barriers and limitations. But I'd also tell him that those challenges don't define what's possible. That kindness from others will open doors he can't even imagine yet. That the moment coming when a guard helps him stand will be just the beginning of learning to stand for himself, for others, for what matters. I'd tell him that life will be different than he dreams, but also richer and fuller and more meaningful than he could possibly understand at 7 years old." He paused, emotion catching in his throat. "And I'd tell him that he's about to meet someone who will change his life forever. Someone who will see past the wheelchair to the person inside. Someone who will show him that impossible is just a word, and that with support and determination and belief, you can stand taller than you ever thought possible." James put his arm around Diego's shoulders, a gesture of friendship and pride. "And I would tell myself," James added, "that in a few minutes, I'm going to make the best decision of my career. That breaking protocol to help a child will matter more than every perfect formation, every flawless ceremony, every day of standing perfectly still. I'd tell myself to trust the feeling that says, helping this boy is more important than any rule. Because some moments matter more than procedures. Some connections matter more than protocol. Some chances to make a difference are too important to pass by. The two men stood together in silence for a moment, the camera capturing their quiet reflection. Around them, life at Buckingham Palace continued its timeless rhythm. Guards marched in perfect formation. Tourists took photos. The palace stood as it had for centuries, symbol of tradition and continuity. But tradition had made room for compassion. Continuity had embraced change. And in that space between the old ways and new understanding, between duty and humanity, between protocol and love, a royal guard, James adjusted his grip, maintaining full support while positioning himself to help Diego attempt what he wanted to try. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to help you shift your weight from one leg to the other, just a tiny bit. It won't be real steps, but it will be the motion of walking. Your brain will remember this feeling, and that will help with therapy. Ready? Diego nodded, his small face set with fierce determination. The film crew moved in closer, capturing every detail. Maria held Carlos's hand tightly, both parents barely breathing as they watched their son prepare to do something they had been told might never be possible. Left leg first, James instructed. I'm going to shift your weight slightly. Let your right leg relax a bit, put a tiny bit more weight on the left. Don't try to control it, just let it happen. Slowly, carefully, James shifted Diego's weight. The boy's left leg bore slightly more weight than before, the muscles engaging to keep the knee from buckling. Diego's face showed intense concentration, every bit of his attention focused on what his legs were doing. Good, James encouraged. That's really good. Now we're going to shift back to the right. Same thing. The movement was tiny, barely perceptible to anyone watching, but to Diego, it felt monumental. He was making his legs do something purposeful, something coordinated. It wasn't walking, not even close, but it was the basic mechanics of walking. It was the shift of weight that every step required. They repeated the motion several times, James guiding and supporting while Diego's legs did what they could. Sweat beaded on the boy's forehead from the effort and concentration. His legs trembled with exertion, but they held. That's enough, James said after about a minute. You did brilliantly, but we don't want to overdo it. As James carefully lowered Diego back into his wheelchair, the boy was crying. But these were tears of joy, of accomplishment, of doors opening. He had felt himself making stepping motions. He had felt his legs working in a coordinated way, even if they couldn't support him alone. It was progress, real and tangible. Maria rushed forward and hugged her son tightly, her own tears flowing freely. Carlos put his hand on Diego's shoulder, unable to speak past the emotion clogging his throat. The film crew captured it all, the raw emotion and authentic joy of the moment. James stepped back, letting the family have their moment. He felt that same tightness in his chest he had experienced 6 months ago. The overwhelming sense of being part of something important. He wasn't just a guard standing at a post. He was a human being who had helped another human being reach for something they thought impossible. When the emotions settled somewhat, the documentary director approached with James's commanding officer, Major Dennings, who had been observing from a distance. The major wore an expression James couldn't quite read. Sullivan, Major Dennings said formally, could I speak with you for a moment? James snapped to attention, old habits kicking in. Yes, sir. They walked a short distance away while the film crew interviewed Diego and his parents. Major Dennings was quiet for a moment, watching the family with a thoughtful expression. 6 months ago, when that first video went viral, do you know what I thought? The major asked. No, sir. I thought it was a one-time thing. A nice moment, good publicity for the guard, but nothing more. I was wrong. The major turned to look at James directly. Do you know how many letters we've received at the palace about you? About what you did? James shook his head. Thousands, literally thousands. And do you know what most of them say? They say that seeing your kindness, seeing you break protocol to help that boy, it restored their faith in humanity. It reminded them that compassion matters. Several letters were from veterans who said you represented what they thought military service should be about, strength in service of kindness. James didn't know what to say. He stood at attention, waiting for the major to continue. The palace has decided to recognize your actions officially. You'll be receiving a commendation for outstanding service and for representing the finest qualities of the Queen's Guard. The ceremony will be next month. The major's stern expression softened slightly. More importantly, at least to me, you've inspired something. The Guard is implementing a new program. Once a month, we'll be hosting visits from children with disabilities or serious illnesses. We'll give them tours. Let them try on the hats, help them feel special. We're calling it the Sullivan Initiative. James felt his throat tighten. Sir, I don't know what to say. That's incredible. It was your example that made it possible. You showed us that our duty isn't just to stand and march. It's to represent the best of what we can be. Strength and compassion together. The major extended his hand. Well done, James. Truly well done. They shook hands, a gesture of respect between soldiers. James felt overwhelmed by the recognition but also humbled. He had just wanted to help a kid see the palace. Now it had become something so much larger. The documentary filmed for several more hours, capturing James and Diego spending time together, talking about courage and determination and dreams. James introduced Diego to several other guards, who were all kind and welcoming to the boy. Diego got to wear a full guard uniform that had been specially sized for a child, complete with a bearskin hat. The photos from that day would become treasured family possessions. During a quiet moment, Diego showed James something he had brought from Spain. It was a notebook filled with drawings. Page after page showed pictures of guards, of Buckingham Palace, and of one drawing repeated many times with slight variations. It showed Diego himself, standing tall in a guard uniform, no wheelchair in sight. This is what I dream about, Diego explained. My therapist says maybe I won't ever walk normally, but I think I will. I think one day, I'll come back here and I'll walk through that gate on my own feet. James looked at the drawings, at the hope and determination evident in every pencil stroke. He thought carefully about how to respond. He didn't want to give false hope, but he also didn't want to crush the dream that had given this boy so much motivation. Diego, James said thoughtfully, I don't know what the future holds. None of us do. Maybe you'll walk normally one day. Maybe you'll always need help or equipment. But I do know this. You're already strong. You're already brave. You're already everything a guard should be, even if you never stand without help again. The uniform doesn't make the soldier. The heart does. And you have the heart of a lion. Diego absorbed these words, understanding the balance James was trying to strike. But I can still try, he said. I can still work hard and see what happens. Absolutely, James agreed. Always try. Always work hard. Always push yourself to be better than you were yesterday. That's what being a soldier is really about. Not the standing still or the marching. It's about discipline and effort and never giving up. You already do all of that. The boy smiled, satisfied with this answer. He carefully put his notebook away, the dreams inside it still intact, but now balanced with a more mature understanding of what strength really meant. As the day drew to a close, the Martinez family had to leave for their flight back to Spain. The goodbyes were easier this time, perhaps because they now understood that distance didn't diminish the connection they had formed. They would stay in touch. Technology made that possible in ways that would have been impossible in earlier times. Diego hugged James one final time. Thank you for being my friend, he said in English. Thank you for showing me I could stand. Thank you for reminding me why I do this job, James replied. You made me better at being a guard. You made me better at being human. As their taxi drove away, James waved until it disappeared around a corner. He stood there for a moment longer, reflecting on the strange and wonderful journey that had started with one impulsive decision 6 months ago. He thought about how we never know which moments will matter, which small acts of kindness will ripple outward into something bigger. The documentary aired 3 months later on BBC One during prime time. It was called Standing Tall, Diego's Story, and it followed the entire journey from the first viral moment through Diego's therapy and back to the reunion at Buckingham Palace. The program showed both the beautiful moments and the difficult ones, the progress, and the setbacks. It was honest about the challenges Diego faced while celebrating his determination and spirit. The response was overwhelming. The documentary won several awards for its touching portrayal of disability, determination, and human connection. More importantly, it sparked conversations about accessibility, about how society treats people with disabilities, about the power of believing in someone. Donations to children's physical therapy programs increased significantly in the months following the broadcast. James watched the documentary with his daughter Emma, who was so proud of her father she couldn't stop talking about it at school. When it showed the moment James first approached Diego's wheelchair, Emma grabbed her father's hand. "You're a hero, Daddy," she said simply. "No," James corrected gently. "Diego is the hero. I just helped a little bit." In Spain, Diego watched the documentary surrounded by family, friends, and neighbors who had gathered to see their local celebrity's story told to the world. When it showed him doing the weight-shifting exercise with James's help, attempting those proto-steps, Diego felt that familiar surge of determination. He had come so far already. How much further could he go? After the documentary, Diego became a minor celebrity in Spain. He was invited to speak at schools, to share his story with other children facing challenges. At first, he was shy and nervous. But James's words echoed in his mind. The heart of a lion. Diego found his courage and spoke about determination, about not giving up, about how sometimes help comes from unexpected places. His physical therapy continued, and the progress was real if slow. By his 8th birthday, Diego could stand with the support of parallel bars for nearly 2 minutes. He could shift his weight from leg to leg with minimal assistance. He took his first assisted steps, moving his legs in a walking motion while therapists supported most of his weight. Each milestone was celebrated, but never treated as the final destination. There was always more work to do, always another goal to reach for. The Sullivan Initiative at Buckingham Palace launched to great success. Once a month, the guards hosted children with various challenges, giving them special tours and attention. The guards wore their full uniforms but showed their human sides, kneeling to talk with children, letting them touch the bearskin hats, taking photos that families would treasure forever. James participated whenever his schedule allowed, but the program had grown beyond him. It was now part of the guard's identity, a tradition in its own right. One guard in particular, a young man named Thomas Wright, was inspired by James's example to start volunteering with disability advocacy groups in his free time. Thomas had a cousin with cerebral palsy, and Diego's story had made him realize he could do more to support his cousin and others like him. Several other guards followed suit, volunteering at hospitals and therapy centers. The culture was shifting, the understanding growing that strength included compassion. The years passed. Diego grew older, continued his therapy, and made incremental progress. By age 10, he could walk short distances with leg braces and crutches, his wheelchair now something he used for longer distances rather than constant necessity. It wasn't the dramatic transformation of movie magic, but it was real progress earned through years of grueling work. Diego kept the guard pin with him always, now wearing it on a chain around his neck. It had become his talisman, his reminder of the day everything changed. The metal had worn smooth in places from constant handling, but it remained precious beyond measure. James and Diego stayed in contact through video calls and messages. They talked about Diego's progress, about James's family, about life and dreams and determination. Their connection had evolved into genuine friendship that transcended the dramatic origin story. They were two people who had helped each other see the world differently. On Diego's 12th birthday, he received a special package from London. Inside was a new guard's pin, polished and official, along with a letter written in James's careful handwriting. Dear Diego, you kept the pin I gave you when you were 7, even though I told you it was yours to keep. But that pin was old and worn, just like I was getting worn down by routine and protocol. You gave me something much more valuable than I gave you. You gave me purpose. You reminded me why service matters. This new pin represents a promise. When you turn 18, if you want it, there will be a place for you here at the palace. Maybe not as a standing guard, but there are many ways to serve. We would be honored to have someone with your strength of character as part of our team. Keep working hard. Keep dreaming big. Keep being the lion-hearted boy who changed a soldier's life one summer morning. Your friend always, Guard James Sullivan. Diego read the letter so many times he could recite it from memory. The idea of actually working at Buckingham Palace seemed impossible and wonderful all at once. He was 12 now, old enough to understand that life rarely followed the path we imagined. But he was also young enough to believe that impossible things could happen when you worked hard enough and had people who believed in you. His therapy goals shifted slightly as he got older. Complete independence in walking seemed increasingly unlikely according to medical professionals. But Diego could now move around his home with minimal assistance, could stand for several minutes at a time, could do things that doctors had once said were impossible. He wore his leg braces with pride, decorated them with stickers and paint, made them an expression of his personality rather than something to hide. When Diego was 13, his school nominated him for a Youth Courage Award sponsored by the Spanish government. The ceremony was held in Madrid, and Diego gave a speech to an audience of hundreds. He spoke about his journey, about the day at Buckingham Palace that had changed everything, about the guard who had seen potential in a boy in a wheelchair. Guard James taught me that strength isn't about standing alone, Diego said, his voice steady despite his nerves. It's about knowing when to accept help and when to give it. It's about working hard even when progress is slow. It's about believing in yourself because someone else believed in you first. I may never stand in the Queen's Guard like he does, but I can stand for something. I can stand for hope and determination. I can stand for everyone who thinks they can't. The audience gave him a standing ovation. In the front row, his parents wept with pride. And in London, watching via live stream, James Sullivan felt that same tightness in his chest he had experienced years ago when a small boy had looked at him with such trust and hope. By the time Diego was 15, he had become an advocate for disability rights and accessibility in his region of Spain. He worked with local government to improve wheelchair access in public spaces. He visited schools to talk about inclusion and understanding. He helped raise funds for children who needed physical therapy but whose families couldn't afford it. The boy who had once been helped was now helping others, the cycle of kindness continuing outward in ripples that touched countless lives. James's daughter Emma, now 13 herself, had started volunteering at a local center that provided recreational activities for children with disabilities. She told her friends about Diego, about how one day her father had done something kind that had changed multiple lives. Emma understood that heroes weren't just people in uniform standing at palaces. They were people who chose compassion when given the chance. The Sullivan Initiative at Buckingham Palace had expanded beyond anyone's initial vision. It now included quarterly events for children with various challenges, partnerships with multiple charities, and a scholarship program for young people with disabilities who wanted to pursue careers in public service. The program had become so successful that other royal households in Europe had implemented similar initiatives, all inspired by one guard's decision to break protocol to help a child. When Diego was 16, he traveled to London with his parents for a special anniversary. It had been 9 years since that first morning at Buckingham Palace, and the BBC wanted to do a follow-up piece. They wanted to show where Diego was now, how far he had come, what he had accomplished. The reunion with James was emotional for both of them. Diego was taller now, a young man rather than a little boy. He still used a wheelchair for long distances, still wore leg braces, still needed assistance with many physical tasks. But he carried himself with confidence and grace, comfortable in his skin in a way that only comes from years of accepting and working with your limitations while refusing to be defined by them. "Look at you," James said, embracing Diego warmly. "All grown up." "Not quite yet," Diego replied with a smile. "A few more years. But I remember what you promised. When I turn 18, there might be a place for me here." "That promise stands," James confirmed. "We've been discussing it actually. There are several positions that could work. Nothing is guaranteed, of course, but if you're serious, we'd love to have you." They walked together through the palace grounds, cameras following but given instruction to stay back and let the conversation be natural. Diego moved with crutches now, his legs doing much of the work even if they couldn't do it all. Each step was deliberate and effortful, but they were steps. Real steps. Independent steps. James noticed and felt his heart swell with pride. "You're walking," he said, unnecessarily stating the obvious, but needing to acknowledge it. "Short distances," Diego said, "and it's exhausting. The wheelchair is still necessary for anything more than 100 meters or so. But yes, I'm walking. You were right, you know. The strength was always mine. It just took me a while to find it." They returned to the exact spot where Diego had first stood 9 years earlier. The plaza looked the same, tourists gathering for ceremonies, guards standing at their posts. But everything was different too. The people involved had grown and changed, shaped by that one moment of connection. "I think about this place all the time," Diego admitted. "This is where I learned that impossible is just a word. That with help and work and determination, you can do things that everyone says you can't." "You did that yourself," James reminded him. "I was just fortunate enough to be there to watch." The new documentary titled Still Standing: Diego's Journey aired on the 9th anniversary of the original viral video. It showed Diego's progress over the years, the therapy sessions and setbacks, the achievements and continued challenges. It showed him walking with crutches, standing independently for brief periods, living a full and active life despite his disability. It ended with Diego speaking directly to the camera. "9 years ago, a kind guard helped me stand for the first time in my life. People think that's where the story ends, with that one beautiful moment. But that was just the beginning. Every day since then has been part of the story. Every therapy session, every small improvement, every time I choose to try instead of giving up. The real gift Guard James gave me wasn't those few seconds of standing. It was showing me that someone believed I could." Once you know someone believes in you, it's easier to believe in yourself. To anyone watching this who faces challenges, whatever they might be, remember that. Find someone who believes in you, and then prove them right, one day at a time. The documentary inspired a new generation of viewers. Parents of children with disabilities reached out to share their own stories. Young people facing various challenges found motivation in Diego's persistence. The hashtag that had started 9 years earlier, about faith in humanity being restored, trended again, this time with updates and progress reports from families who had been following Diego's journey. When Diego turned 18, he applied formally to work with the Buckingham Palace Visitor Services Program. The position involved helping coordinate tours and special events, including the Sullivan Initiative programs for children with disabilities. It was perfect for him, combining his personal experience with his passion for helping others. The application process was thorough and fair, with no special treatment given despite his connection to James and the palace's history. Diego had to prove he was qualified, which he did through his interview performance, his advocacy work experience, and his genuine commitment to public service. He was accepted. The notification letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, and Diego called James immediately, barely able to speak through his excitement and tears. His dream, the one he had drawn in notebooks as a 7-year-old boy, was coming true. Not in exactly the way he had imagined, but in a way that was real and meaningful and his own. The Martinez family moved to London that fall. Carlos found work as a carpenter, while Maria got a position at a local school, helping Spanish-speaking families navigate the education system. They found a small but comfortable flat, not far from where James lived with his own family. The two families began spending time together regularly, their friendship having grown deep roots over the years. Diego's first day at Buckingham Palace was emotional for everyone involved. He wore a professional uniform, not a guard's red coat, but an official palace staff outfit that he wore with equal pride. His name badge read, Diego Martinez, Visitor Services, and next to his name, almost hidden, but there if you looked closely, was a small pin. The same guard pin James had given him 11 years earlier. James was there for Diego's first day, officially as a mentor, but really as the friend who had started this entire journey. He showed Diego around the staff areas, introduced him to colleagues, helped him understand the protocols and procedures. But mostly, he just watched Diego take his place in the institution they both served, feeling proud beyond words. Diego's role put him in direct contact with the children who came through the Sullivan Initiative. He understood them in ways that others couldn't. When a child seemed scared or frustrated, Diego would kneel beside their wheelchair and tell them his story. He would show them his leg braces, demonstrate how he walked with crutches, and share the guard pin that had meant so much to him. He would tell them about standing at this very palace, about a guard who believed in him, about how that one moment had changed everything. The children listened with wide eyes, seeing hope reflected in Diego's presence. If he could work here, if he could achieve his dreams despite his challenges, then maybe they could too. Diego became a living example of possibility, proof that limitations didn't have to mean the end of dreams, just different paths to reach them. One Saturday morning, 2 years into Diego's work at the palace, a family from Italy arrived with their daughter Sophia, a 9-year-old girl who used a wheelchair due to spina bifida. Sophia was shy and seemed overwhelmed by the grandeur of the palace and the crowds of tourists. She held her mother's hand tightly, looking like she wanted to disappear. Diego was assigned to their tour group. He approached Sophia's wheelchair and knelt beside it, just as James had knelt beside his wheelchair 12 years earlier. The parallel wasn't lost on Diego. History was repeating, but this time he was in James's position, able to give what had once been given to him. "Hello, Sophia," Diego said gently in Italian, having learned several languages in preparation for his role. "My name is Diego. I work here at the palace. Would you like to know a secret?" The girl looked at him shyly but nodded. "When I was 7 years old, younger than you, I came here as a visitor just like you, and I was in a wheelchair just like you." He showed her his leg braces. "I still need help walking, but a very kind guard taught me something important that day. He taught me that I was stronger than I thought. Would you like me to show you some special places and tell you that story?" Sophia's eyes brightened. She nodded more enthusiastically this time. As Diego guided the family through the palace, telling Sophia about his experience, James happened to be passing by in his guard uniform. He was 44 now, with some gray at his temples, but still tall and strong and proud in his red coat. He saw Diego with the Italian family and understood immediately what